Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. And make sure you go and get yourself that lovely, sparkling, effervescent drink because you deserve to spoil yourself. And I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. And what is better than a good story? So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my Bigfoot encounter happened in 1989. When I was living in rural Tennessee with my husband Barry. We lived in a stunningly picturesque wooden log cabin on a hilly elevation that was flanked on every side with areas of emerald green forest that literally went back for hundreds of miles. In the distance you could see the high-rise mountains that towered majestically against the pale blue firmament. We lived well off the beaten track with our nearest neighbours literally miles away. And despite the remoteness, I loved the solitude of my life. Quite literally, the deer and the mountain lions were my real neighbours, and I loved it that way. I had a huge passion and respect for nature, and I would spend all my spare time hiking and exploring the gorgeous countryside. I would also make regular trips to a beautiful pebbly stream that travailed through one of our wild areas of natural woodland, and there I would sit with my easel and my oils paints, surveying the beautiful scenery and painting magnificent scenes of nature. During the day, my husband worked for a wealthy farmer in the local area, helping him with all kinds of jobs around his farm, and he did pay handsomely, as my husband was competent at all his outdoor jobs and exceedingly good with his hands. One day I got a dramatic telephone call from my sister Sylvia, who had suddenly fallen off her horse and broken a leg and a couple of ribs in a riding accident. Apparently, the horse had become freaked out about a strange clanging sound it had heard, and subsequently it bucked her off his back, where her foot became entrenched in the syrup, and she had been dragged around the large meadow. She got off lightly, it would seem, in the circumstances, with only a few injuries, such as broken ribs. Let me assure you that a broken rib can be a massive setback for anyone, as pain can be relentless. She wondered in the circumstances if I wouldn't mind taking care of my 4.5-year-old niece, just for a few days, she assured me. It would appear that her usually competent au pair, who minded her kid, had run off with a boyfriend to Hawaii for a sunny break. Although I agreed to help, I did warn her that I wasn't confident of my skills as a babysitter, as I had no experience with children whatsoever, and I could not guarantee doing a great job. "Oh, it'll be a doddle," she assured me. "Kids aren't complicated. I'll get Mark," that was her husband, "to drop her off along with some of her toys, and she'll be good to go, I promise you that." My sister made it all sound terribly easy. But when Mark did drop off my 4.5-year-old niece at our countryside home, I found that she wasn't easy to manage at all. On the contrary, she was an absolute handful of unabated energy, and was always wandering off and getting easily distracted. I tried to occupy her with everything I could, like finger painting and moulding clay and even Lego blocks, but she pretty much became jaded and disinterested in everything that I presented her with. I have to admit that I became increasingly exasperated by my niece's constant need for stimulation. I suddenly developed a huge admiration for every single mother out there, and realised in horror that raising a kid has got to be the most laborious, arduous, and challenging job in the entire world, especially when there are kids that are Kayla's age to deal with. It was on a Friday morning when my niece was playing with her plastic telephone that I'd actually brought her from a toy shop, that luckily seemed to be holding her attention for longer than most of her toys had. She was talking on the fake phone, enjoying her little adult-like conversation. I heard her say, "You must smack him for being a very naughty boy." I smiled to myself and then went racing into the kitchen. I had forgotten to put the bread on timer, and I could smell the burnt charcoal all over the house. Everything was smoking, and my eyes were watering from the smoky vapours. I opened all the windows of the house to air the place. I could see my niece standing on the settee in the living area,
with her back facing towards me. She was making strange, contorted faces at the window and chuckling all the time. I was so pleased to see that finally she was entertaining herself. She was talking, giggling, and chuckling all the time. I smiled gratefully to myself. I had heard of kids having invisible friends before, and this clearly was one of those scenarios, I thought. That evening I prepared my niece fish fingers and potato chips, served with tomato sauce. She was playing with her food and dunking the fish finger into the tomato sauce and tucking it into her mouth with great gusto, staining the edges of her mouth with red stains. "Do you think Tommy would like fish fingers?" she asked me. "I'm sure he would," I said, assuming that Tommy was her invisible friend. "Then I'll save some for him," she said, putting a fish finger into her napkin and folding it up. I decided to overlook the fish finger and napkin incident, as clearly her invisible friend felt very real to her, and I knew if I kept the charade up, then maybe my niece would not be so demanding on me, as selfish as that does sound. I don't mind admitting to you that taking care of little Kyla was wearing me to the ground, and I was feeling physically drained and utterly exhausted. I tucked little Kayla up in her Snoopy-covered duvet with a little brown teddy bear tucked in her arms, and I read her a bedtime story about Water, the clever butterfly. With relief, I watched her falling off to deep sleep, but that was very short-lived when during the night I was awoken to strange knocking sounds all over the house that sounded like someone was hitting the walls, which was profoundly odd. I could hear delightful squeals of laughter coming from Kayla's room, and I saw to my horror that she was jumping up and down on her bed in her Snoopy pyjamas, looking outside her window, saying, "Tommy is here! Tommy is here!" She appeared to be absolutely delighted. "I want to go outside to see Tommy," she said. "I want to play with him right now." Foolishly, I forgot about the strange knocks, and I tucked Kyla into bed, reassuring her that Tommy needed a good night's sleep, otherwise he would be very tired in the morning and would not want to play with her. At this, Kyla did listen, and she seemed satisfied, and insisted on putting her fish finger on the outside window mantle for little Tommy to get later, when he finally got hungry. I'm ashamed to say that my ignorance with children transcends to massive heights, relegating me to the very high rank of the worst possible babysitter in the entire world. I assure you that there were no intuitive alarm bells ringing in my head at this strange gesture of kindness from Kyla that bordered on the peculiar. I just thought it was normal that she was putting a fish finger out on the mantle. It was really bizarre that I should even think that. The following morning I was cleaning my rustic home that looked like a mini tornado had vandalised the entire living room, that was literally littered with Lego blocks, kids' drawings, baby dolls and tiny dolls' dresses that were literally scattered over every available surface. I picked up Kayla's toys, replacing them in a large cardboard box marked toys, and then I plumped up the cushions to gain some kind of respect on the sofas and started hoovering the carpet. Kayla was playing on her little tricycle yards away from me on the outer porch. I could hear the bicycle wheels squeaking on the wooden decking. Kayla was talking excitedly to her invisible friend, and I could hear her high-pitched voice squealing out in utter delight. "I've got a telephone! I can talk to you on my phone! I can call you!" I was laughing to myself. She was doing a great job in entertaining herself, I thought. And then I suddenly heard it, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was a strange chattering sound, unlike anything I've ever heard before, but it did have a monkey-like tone to it. It was very odd. For a moment I just froze to the spot, hardly daring to believe what I'd just heard. I tightened my hand on the hoover. Surely I was mistaken. Then I heard the chattering sound again. I switched off the droning sound of the hoover immediately and rushed over to the glass sliding doors to see who Kayla was actually talking to. and I could hardly believe what my eyes were witnessing. Kayla was talking to a little hairy ape-like humanoid that was about 3 feet tall and covered with red-brown hair all over its body, apart from its hazelnut-coloured face that was completely hairless. The creature had a bullet-shaped head, very distinctive prominent brow ridge, a wide flat nose, and very deep-set, lively yellow-brown eyes that did seem to sparkle brightly. Its demeanour was very excitable, and it seemed to be really revelling and enjoying Kayla's company. It wore an exuberant expression on its leathery brown face, which was animated, and his mouth was curled back to show off a glistening set of pearl-white teeth that appeared to be smiling. For a second I just froze to the spot, incapacitated by a stupefied horror rather than by fear. What was this thing, I wondered? I'd never seen a creature like this before. Should I be concerned? I hurriedly dashed through the sliding doors and grabbed Kayla off her little tricycle, lifting her into my arms quickly and bringing her indoors as fast as I could, bolting the doors behind me. What else was I supposed to do? Kayla was not amused by my actions, and she had a childlike tantrum and hissy fit. "I want to play with Tommy! I want to play with Tommy! I want to play with Tommy! I want to play with Tommy!" she said, stamping her tiny little feet in a gesture of defiant insubordination. "I want to play with Tommy! Why aren't you letting me play with Tommy?" Ignoring my niece, I went over to the glass sliding door, and staring out of the sheer glass panel, I found myself looking directly into the eyes of the little ape-like humanoid, who was staring back at us with a look of curious intrigue all over his face. "Go away," I said. "Go away, creature! Go away! Go away!" I tried to make gestures for the creature to leave, but the creature chattered so excitedly, and it began to mimic my gestures and impersonated my serious facial expressions, clearly believing that this was all a terribly exciting game. I remember grabbing a large bunch of bananas, because I knew monkeys liked bananas, and that was my first reaction, and I threw them out of the window, falsely believing that the little humanoid would just dash off with them and hopefully run back into the forests where he must have come from, I thought. But the creature grabbed the bananas and started to eat them on the wooden deck, cramming them into his mouth, including the skins, and he made some very satisfied, appreciative grunts. "Mmm, mmm, mmm." I could hear a whistling sound from the valley, and I saw this colossal creature literally gliding towards our cabin, and her movements were seamless, agile, and flawless, and she bounded over the wooden railing with the agility of a domestic cat. She bolted towards her little youngling with a furious look written on her face. She looked like a mother who was exasperated with her naughty child, and she was standing on our wooden deck, chattering away to the creature in a high-pitched voice. I could sense that she was reprimanding the youngling and giving him a huge telling off, and he appeared to be hanging his little head in shame, looking incredibly despondent. The mother was utterly magnificent. I know of no other words to describe her, because she towered at 9 feet tall and weighed at least 800 pounds, and she was majestic, lofty, powerful, and imposing. She was covered from head to toe with long red-brown hair that glistened magnificently in the beams and the shafts of sunlight. Her body was dense with sinewy muscular definition, and in worldly terms she was simply ripped, but she did appear to have a pair of firm breasts and a very evident maternal demeanour. Her long primate-like arms lifted up the little humanoid, where its legs clasped loosely around her slender hips. Suddenly she looked up as she sensed me watching her, with a look of sheer astonished enchantment on my face. For a moment our eyes just locked together, and it was like we connected, and I almost sensed that she was apologising for her youngling's behaviour. Her beautiful yellow-brown eyes registered such sharp intelligence, and I watched her hopping over the wooden banisters and gliding into the woods seamlessly. She only glanced back once in my direction, very briefly, as if she was saying goodbye. I knew very suddenly that the little youngling would not be troubling us any more. It was such a very powerful, intuitive feeling that came over me like a very instinctive revelation. My little niece was very upset and angry with me. She was upset that little Tommy was not there to play with her, and she persistently complained, "I want Tommy to play with me. I want Tommy to play with me. You made him go away. Why did you make him go?" I asked her why she called the creature Tommy. "'Cause he told me," she said. "How could he tell you if he doesn't speak our language?" I asked her. "'Cause he speaks into your head, silly." It was then that I was convinced that these creatures have some kind of clear telepathic ability, because I had literally sensed the mother apology, an assurance to me that had appeared like crystal clear words in my mind. She told me in my mind that Tommy would not be bothering us again, that she would make sure of that. Believe me, she fulfilled her promises, because I never saw those creatures again, much to my bitter disappointment. After these strange set of circumstances that had come to pass in my life, I developed a particular longing to encounter the creatures again, which I have learnt is very common among observers of these creatures, many who might spend their entire lifetime seeking out another encounter with the elusive, hairy humanoid. After Kyla returned home, everything around my home returned to normal. I looked out for those phenomenal creatures, but sadly I never ever saw them again. But I do know for sure that these marvellous creatures are out there, roaming the forests of North America. And that is one thing I know for certain. Bear in mind that this was in the early 80s, so when I did tell my husband what I'd seen, he was convinced I'd seen something else, like a hairy vagrant living in the woods, or a bear. I did tell him that the vagrant would clearly have had to have a major problem with excessive body hair, if that had been the case, but my husband remained convinced that it had in fact been a man that I had seen. I remember reconciling myself that there was no way I could convince anyone in what I had seen, because people would never believe my story, and I just had to live with that. It was only a decade or so later that I learnt the creatures that I'd seen were known as Sasquatches or Bigfoots. I was never once frightened by the creatures, but I assure you it was only because the ones I encountered were so warm, human-like and incredibly friendly. I am, however, in absolutely no doubt that should the creature have been aggressive towards me, that would have been a very terrifying experience, because I want to tell you they are apex predators without a doubt, and they do command great respect. Like human beings, I imagine they come in all shapes, sizes, colours and personalities. Kyla has now grown up into a beautiful young woman, but has no recollection of her encounter with the hairy humanoid that she encountered when she was 4.5 years old, which is such a pity. However, if you ask her today if she believes in the mystery elusive creature known as Bigfoot, she certainly does believe he's real. And I think that she feels this way because somewhere in the back of her mind, she knows that he is. And that is my story. Thank you so much for that incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.